Hello and welcome to Mixing Light's Office Hours Live. This is a special edition with Joey Deanna, who is fresh from NAB, right off the show floor from Blackmagic's booth, where he was a demo artist for 4 days. And he was on the show floor pushing around Resolve 18 public beta, demoing it to anyone who walked up and asked him questions. And that's kind of an interesting way of learning new software, is having random people come up to you and ask you questions about features that were literally released a week earlier. And so, Joey, thank you very much for joining us. And how was
Thank
NAB?
you.
Did you have a good time? Did you find it was different this year than previous years?
I had a fantastic time. As most of you guys know, I've demoed for Blackmagic multiple years in the past. It's always been kind of a high point of my year. So thanks to Blackmagic for inviting me out again. This year, the show was a little bit smaller, I have to admit. We didn't have all three halls like we usually do. So the big hall was actually what is called the North Hall. Usually the biggest hall is the South Hall. That's where Blackmagic's booth usually is. So the show itself was a lot smaller, but the amount of people coming through the booth and talking, and I would say like the quality of the interaction with people, some of the questions I was getting, some of the conversations I was having was absolutely fantastic. And it was just really, really good to be back in that environment and to see people that, either I only get to see once a year, some of the people on the Blackmagic team, and to meet people in person that I've connected with over the course of being at home from the pandemic. I met a bunch of Mixing Light members that I hadn't met in the past in person, and it was just really good to be out there with people again.
Now, how was the booth size compared to previous NABs for Blackmagic?
The booth size was basically identical. If you've been to NAB before, the booth would look very familiar. It was pretty much the same setup.
Yeah, and typically, just to give people a sense of how Blackmagic designs, specifically the DaVici Resolve booth, what happens with the DaVinci Resolve booth, they tend to have these tables that are kind of set up for specific tasks. So you'd have the editing side, you'd have the color grading side that would have maybe a set of the advanced panels. Then you have another side that was color grading, but maybe with the mini and the micro panels. So do they have that kind of setup going on this year as well?
Yeah, but just like the software in general with Resolve, it kind of does everything from edit to fusion to obviously color, which is my focus, the Fairlight audio page, all of that stuff. You kind of had to be ready to at least talk about. And if you got into a situation where maybe it was above your head, they had specialists in all of those different fields that you could direct people to.
Right, exactly. So you had to be
So it's
ready
really
to
hard to
take
do
the
a
Fairlight
one-stop
question.
shop on such a deep piece of software.
Yeah, that's very true. The Fairlight, do they have all their audio consoles out? I mean, it looks like they
They did.
finally
They
got
had the
all
the,
their
the
hardware out there.
5-bay Fairlight
Yeah,
console, but they also had,
nice.
which I had never seen in person until the show, the Fairlight desktop console, which is the $3,400 fader console. And to see them use that, some of the really expert Fairlight folks that were there, that little console for only $3,400 is so feature packed if you're doing audio stuff that I was just really impressed with it. It's got lots of really cool like gestural submenus where you hold down one button and roll the scroll wheel a little bit to do things interactively. It has a nice little,
Yeah.
it has a HDMI display of its own, which is kind of cool to show you audio parameters. So it's a really cool little console. It was cool to see that in person. And a big thing on the color side, Blackmagic released the new keycaps and layout for the advanced panel last
Yep.
year, but that was kind of in the middle of the pandemic, and not a lot of colorists have seen them in person if they don't have them. So I had experience with the new keycaps because we have them at our office, but a lot of colorists coming to the booth hadn't seen them yet. And I can tell you that the new layout is really, really good. It's super well thought out. It's more flexible than the old layout. All of the new tools, even the new stuff that's in the beta, is on the panel in the new layout. So that was cool to be able to demo the new advanced panel layout for folks that hadn't seen it yet.
Color Warper. Does Color Warper tools show up
Color Warper
on?
is on the advanced panel.
It is.
So when you have a point selected, you can move it in like rotating it or move it around with the knobs on the panel, and it works Like anything else, it's interactive, which is nice. And what a lot of people didn't realize about the new layout is the side panels can be assigned. So you can put printer lights on one and camera raw on the other, and then change that around based on what you're doing when you're doing it.
Oh, no, and so is it like user assignable? Because we don't have the users that we used to have in Resolve. So is it just like you just kind of pull that up in the
Yeah,
preferences as
you
to?
hit up shift and then a button on either side, and then you can just select what mode it wants to be right on the panel. So if you want
Oh, okay. All right.
primaries, it's a couple buttons away. If you want anything, it's a couple buttons away. You can just leave it on there for the duration of however you're doing that task, which I think is fantastic.
All right. So I'm going to ask you to make sure that you are recording your screen locally
I am.
because the replay I will be replacing the screens with Joey's local screen recording for highest quality. And all right, so Joey, why don't you take it away? Go ahead, share your screen, and we will get this demo started.
All right. So the first thing I want to talk about, because there's been a lot of confusion about it, and it is a huge, in my view, new feature in Resolve 18. That is the Blackmagic Cloud Project Server. And I just want to define a couple terms right now because they've renamed a few things, most specifically project libraries. Anywhere in Resolve 17 or earlier where you saw databases, that's now called a project library. So what you can do with the Blackmagic Cloud, if you sign in with a free account, you can make database servers. Oh, is my internet being too slow? All right, I'm not gonna, there it goes. Okay. So what this does is you'll notice it kind of looks like the project server dialog in Resolve. You can set up your own project libraries. Each one to have Blackmagic hosted is $5 a month, and that is per project library or per database. So unlimited amount of projects inside that library for $5 a month. Now, why would you want the cloud database, and how does this affect colorists that aren't going to use the cloud database? Well, let me switch over to Resolve and I can show you. What makes the Blackmagic Cloud Project Server possible is that DaVinci Resolve 18 has been massively better optimized on the database connection side for dealing with high latency data links like the internet, like a VPN, etc. So if you do host your own SQL project server, you will see the same performance benefits that went into allowing for the Blackmagic cloud hosted database or project library to work. This also means if you host your own library, or sorry, host your own project server anywhere, you can remote into it with a VPN. It will now perform at a much faster pace. And I've tested this. I tested it with a privately hosted database server on a 35 megabit cable modem, and it's perfectly interactive. So there's been a lot of experimentation in the user community over the years trying to set up that SQL server so you can have it in the cloud or remotely, and it's just never worked because of latency problems. Well, Blackmagic has heroically solved that in Resolve 18, and it also allows for them to offer their cloud project server as an option. In the Resolve project database, you'll now notice there is some tabs up here. This is new. You have your local databases or project libraries, which is your disk databases if you're using one. Network is your SQL libraries. And then cloud will connect you to the Blackmagic cloud and any libraries that you've created there. What's a cool new feature in 18 is if you click this little copy icon, we can now copy any project to any of the other databases without having to export a DRP, import a DRP, move things around that way. So I'm going to copy this demo project into my cloud database. And now I'm working off of the cloud right in Resolve. And you can see as I'm moving things around, even with live save turned on, it's super interactive, which I mean, you'll see the improvements in the database connection no matter how you have your database set up. But if you are trying to remotely do a database, this is a massive improvement. Honestly,
Joey,
for five, go ahead.
did they take into account what happens if you lose your internet connection? Like, are you just down at that point, or?
It would basically be the project is still in RAM. So you could either save it as or export a DRP, or kind of wait until your internet connection comes back. But
Wow.
if you have live save turned on, every time you change something, it will be committed to that cloud database. That's no different than if you were on a local database. So you wouldn't lose anything if your internet drops off. Same thing as if you were connected on a VPN to your office. Now, what makes this awesome from a workflow perspective is you can have, and it's important to remember, the cloud service does not move media, right? So you would need your media in all the locations. However, you can do collaboration and you can have multiple users on the same database as long as they have a copy of the media or even a copy of the proxy. So this means you could have 5 editors and 1 colorist having the high-res media, editors having proxies, all over the world working on the same project live. Or if you're a colorist and you have an office and a home suite, you can have duplicates of the media synced any way you want, whether it's Google Drive, Resilio. I use SyncThing, and we've done some insights on doing that for multiple offices, but it's always been bounce a DRP between them, which was really kind of a hassle. Now with the cloud database option, you can just have your project, whether you're at the office, whether you're at home, whether you're remote with a laptop, and everything is live all the time. And to make that work, they changed the way mapped mounts work a little bit. We've always had in preferences mapped mounts, so you could assign like a drive letter for Windows or a path for Mac, but you could only have 1 per location. Well, now with the cloud database, if you can have 5 different people working off a different copy of the media in different folders, you're going to need more advanced path mapping. So now if you go to the project settings, there's a new path mapping feature. You can add as many locations and local paths, the same thing as map mounts, as you want. And what's really cool is anybody that joins the database, if they relink a project, it will automatically by default make those path maps. So if you send some stuff to another colorist, or if you come home, link to your files in a different location, that media mapping under path mapping, which is project specific, not system wide, will automatically assign when you relink the files. So the whole database architecture is now kind of really reaching its full potential, right? I've always thought that having Resolve store its projects in an SQL database was the most flexible way to do it, as opposed to just a project file saved on your computer. Now we're seeing the benefits of that with these new optimizations and with the option to have a cloud hosted database. So I just wanted to kind of explain the cloud thing because there was a lot of confusion about that. The big takeaways are, if you do use their cloud project server, it's $5 a month per library, not per project. And if you share that library with other users, they don't have to pay an additional $5 a month. So it's honestly a very cost-effective situation. If that is not an option for you, but you still want a cloud-hosted or remote accessible project library, you can still host it yourself with an SQL server, which is great for bigger facilities or projects that need much more lockdown security and management. Or if you're just using the same project server setup you've always used, all of these optimizations will make your saving, loading, interaction just a little bit faster. So not a huge flashy thing, but workflow wise, I think it's a big, big, big deal. Now,
Joey, let's pause here. You're going to move off of this topic, or because
I was going to start talking about my favorite color page features.
All right, so before you do that, let's open up real quick to some questions that anyone has on the cloud-based thing, the database thing. We've got 2 questions in the chat from Tony asking if did Resolve 18 public beta have anything that kind of competed with, SetStream or some of the live streaming options that you would typically go to a third party for?
It doesn't have anything that is live streaming from your workstation to a group of clients on the web, something like SetStream, but there is a new direct point-to-point live streaming option that works really, really well if you're trying to access a remote Resolve instance or you're trying to go point-to-point to a reference monitor, and that is the new DaVici Resolve remote video option. Now, there's a couple limitations with that on the server side, as in the actual Resolve workstation. You need to be on an NVIDIA GPU, and I'm on Windows or Linux. on the client side. You can be on any computer, Mac, Windows, Linux, as long as it has a decklink card. And from there, you just basically put in your IP address and say stream at this quality, and it will do a direct point-to-point stream of your color page SDI output to the other remote decklink. But that's only from one workstation to one viewer. It's not a point to multi-point hosted solution. Now, on the Blackmagic Cloud service, they demoed a feature called presentations, which is a really cool little way to interact with your clients in that you do post a file. It's not a live stream out of your Resolve system. So you post a file, and then everybody can log in live, and you can video chat like you were on Zoom or Google Meet or whatever. And then one person can control the playhead and move the entire thing, hit play, hit stop, navigate, so everybody can talk at the same point of the piece at the same time. Or you can unlock the playhead and everybody can move it around how they want and leave comments. And those comments will sync with your Resolve timeline. The presentations feature is not in public beta yet. It's in a limited private beta. And I think we're going to see a lot of this cloud stuff evolve and roll out more deeply as the weeks and months of the beta go on, because there's so many Resolve users in the world. If they just put the beta out of all the cloud services at once, there would need a lot of servers really, really quickly. So they're trying to scale it up intelligently. So that's direct point-to-point streaming with a decklink card is now part of Resolve 18, which I think is really cool. That's going to be really useful for a lot of facilities. And the presentations feature has some really interesting workflow possibilities with it, but we haven't seen it in depth yet in its final form.
Now, Tony also asked about the SQL database and the cloud database. Now, so I guess he wasn't clear on if this database is how that factored into the cloud-based service, if there was some sort of disk database cloud thing.
Disk databases are the same they've always been. They're really only for your local machine. There is no cloud disk database. There is no cloud storage for disk databases, and disk databases can't do things like multi-user collaboration, because if you have a project file just sitting on a drive, you can't have multiple machines access it at the same time as you can with an SQL database. Great. But if you haven't tried an SQL database before, because the IT side of it is too complicated, now Blackmagic will handle all of that for you for $5 a month, which I think is a pretty good deal.
Yeah, that's a great deal. All right, so keep going forward. No one else. If anyone has a question, raise your hand. And as you have questions related directly to what Joey's talking about, raise your hand and I'll find a good point to get you into the conversation.
So there are some really, really cool new grading tools that I think I'm going to use really all the time. First one I want to talk about is the new MagicMask Object Mask. Now, if you remember what MagicMask is, it's basically a machine learning based automatic people tracker, right? It will find the outline of different features on a person, whether it be their entire body, face, arms, etc., and track them through the shot, generating a mask for color correction. Well, what the object-based MagicMask does, and if you look at the MagicMask panel, now it defaults to object. The old behavior, if we hit this little selector on the top right, MagicMask person, the default is now objects, but you can still use the person one. Basically, what you're doing is you're telling Resolve what object to look for and to look for it throughout the entire shot. So to do that, we're going to use the little plus sampler and the minus sampler to kind of make a selection and show you the power of this. So I'm going to turn on highlight for this node. And what I found is with the object mask, doing like a nice long stroke on what you want does a great job of finding it initially. So I wanted to get just his skin tone. So I'm going to turn off highlight. You can see right now it's grabbing a little bit of that letter behind it, and it's not getting this side. So I'm going to add another stroke here. Getting there. Good. And then I'm going to go to the subtract and take out what I don't want. So now I grab that too. Now I've got a pretty good model of what I want the object mask to find. Another important thing to remember when you're working with object mask, or sorry, when you're working with the object mode of MagicMask, is it's best to get this starting point before you track anything. So you don't do one stroke, track it, come back, do another stroke, track it. get this model of what it's looking for as good as you can, and then just tell it track forward and back. And what it's going to do, watch as he turns his hand, shuffles those letters around. It does a really good job of finding exactly just the skin tones. And just like with any qualifier, you have all the same blur, clean white, clean black, denoise, and even shrink, grow, opening and closing iterations for refining that matte as you would with a qualifier. And I think this is really important because anytime you deal with an automatic tool in color grading, if there's no way to refine it and adjust the automatic result, we can't really use it, right? Because if you're doing this on 1,000 shots and 10 of them fail and you can't change it, you can't really use it at all, because then you're going to be stuck. So I'm just going to blur this a little bit, turn off highlight, and now you can see we can do a pretty competent little color grade on that. And it plays down in real time once the tracking is done. And, you know, that would be a pretty heavy ask to roto that manually, frame by frame, with the amount of motion going on, which is really cool. One other example I want to show you is that object-based MagicMask does an incredible job dealing with occlusions. So I'm going to do the same thing, build a selection of this car. So I got about the back half of the car. Cool. I want to get the hood, and then over here, and maybe this bottom wheel. Good. I think that looks pretty all right. I'm just going to do the minus selection to get rid of some of this grass down here. And I'm going to get rid of her arm a little bit. Cool. So I'm pretty happy with that as a starting point. I'm going to track that through the shot, and notice even, did I hit stop? Yeah, so I'm tracking it through the shot. As the woman in the foreground walks through, her occlusion of the magic mask is working really well. And even look at the very back of the shot where the woman in the background is opening the trunk, the mask follows her as well. And again, this matte can be refined with blur, clean black, clean white, all the other refinement tools for qualifiers that we would normally use. I wouldn't characterize these mattes as being good enough for visual effects or compositing, but for a nice soft matte for color grading, they work really, really well. And again, once it's tracked, it's going to play down in real time, and all of your color adjustments will follow it, which is,
Yeah, it's especially if you're not making
pretty
like
impressive.
huge contrast adjustments, right? If when you start making contrast adjustments is when these types of very rough masks start
Yeah,
really
exactly. Like
falling
if I
apart.
crank this way crazy town, you'll start to see
Yeah,
the messiness in the mask. But for the kind of targeted
actually pretty damn
small
good.
color grading corrections that we're going to be making, it's a super useful tool. And it's also really useful for occluding foreground objects. So for example, if I had to blur the license plate or something on that car, and I knew that she was walking in front of it, I could do the opposite. I could take just the foreground subject and make a mask of that, and then use that as a holdback matte for a blur or a correction or paintwork or something like that, which works
Joey,
really well.
are you on the M1? Or because I mean, typically with Magic Mask, I've found in Resolve 17, it was such a hog on the system that I just didn't go to it unless I really, really needed some help. And
It's pretty
this
quick
is
these days. Granted, a couple things. I do have it set to faster quality, which
okay.
helps.
Yeah,
I
that definitely
am
helps.
on, since we're doing a web stream, I didn't think we needed
Yep.
to be on the super better quality and wait for it.
Yep.
But better quality is definitely slower and better quality. And yes, I am on the M1. I'm on the M1 Max Studio, and it performs pretty well, I got to be honest.
Now, Dario has a question, and this is actually a really good pointer. If you've got the handles, do you recommend activating handles for doing this kind of work with the Magic Mask?
If you need to use the handles, yes. Because like I said, it seems to work the best when you track all of it at once. So if you are working with something where you need to deliver handles, I would definitely recommend having the handles enabled. So when you do track forward and back, it'll track the entirety of the shot, including your handles.
Yeah, great.
So the next thing I want to talk about on the color page is a really, really cool new open effects called the depth map. And what the depth map does, I'm just going to go to another shot here, add a corrector node, feed the background into it. And if I grab a depth map and turn on highlight, what the depth map does is it gives us an estimated Z depth matte of the depth of the shot, black being far away, white being closer to you. And again, this is a machine learning based tool. So you do need to be able to customize it a little bit, which is where we have some things like adjust map levels, isolation, and post-processing. So how would I use this? Well, in this case, again, I'm going to switch to faster because this one is definitely a resource hog. It's something you're going to want to cache. If I adjust the far limit, I can kind of isolate the background. And if I adjust the near limit, I can isolate the foreground. And what makes this really useful is that since we're in a node-based color grading environment, let's say I wanted to use this to grade the foreground and the background separately, use this matte. I'm happy with it, except for this little chunk in the foreground where the foreground character is, right? I don't want that in my map. Well, since we're in a node-based environment, I can just use any of my normal other color grading tools to augment the automatic machine learning based tool. So I can just use a power window, knock that right out of there. And now I've got a matte that I can use to color correct the foreground, or if I feed it into another node and invert it, the background separately. We can also use any other OpenFX tools right in the chain. So if I did want to kind of soften this a bit, I could add a Gaussian blur to the matte. So now I can adjust how wide that matte is blurring and falling off. I can even grab another OpenFX for alpha matte shrink and grow and directly manipulate the matte that the depth matte is the depth map is making with a shrink or a grow. I do need to change the process to RGB blank alpha so it does it on the image, not on the matte. But now you can see I've got shrink and grow tools for this matte. So we can use the depth map to make any kind of customizable matte based on the image depth as we want. And it works great for isolating foregrounds and backgrounds, but it can also be used for some really cool, more stylistic things. So I'm going to throw another depth map on this shot. And instead of really kind of making it a binary, like foreground, background matte, like I did in the previous shot, I'm going to make a really soft gradient. And then I'm going to feed that matte into a corrector node. And I'm going to invert it as well. Now, if I go in and just kind of reduce the contrast on that node, I can make a kind of volumetric fog color effect that goes with the depth of the shot. And since it's being driven by that same OFX, if I go back to the depth matte, I can adjust the near limit and the far limit. And look, you can see the fog kind of rolls around the depth of the shot. And I got to say, the accuracy of this depth map is really, really, really good. You can even isolate
this is my
small
first time seeing it, Joey, and I got to tell you, I'm actually pretty impressed. I haven't had a chance to dig into Resolve 18 yet. And Tony has an interesting question. Can you go to shot 2 on your timeline? Because she starts in the kind of the middle ground and works her way into the foreground, and see how that depth map deals with that transition, if it does.
Look at her getting darker as she goes away,
Yeah.
brighter as she comes forward.
Yeah.
It worked. And so if I was doing a kind of volumetric fog effect like I was showing on this shot, she would come out of it as she moved in. Just to really show you how accurate the depth map is, the isolation controls let you isolate a specific depth and say how wide it is. So I'm going to do a very small sliver of depth and just move it from the back of the shot to the front of the shot. You can see, I mean, it does a really good job finding where the different depth points are on the shot. And I mean, the possibilities for this are endless. You can use it for a matte for color correction, like I showed earlier. You can use it for volumetric effects. You can use it for creative effects. You can use it to isolate foregrounds and backgrounds. And the depth map is available in Fusion. So if you're compositing and you need things to kind of go behind other things, it's a quick way to get really usable mattes.
Yeah, we just a heads up for Mixing Light members. We have a new contributor that'll be joining us in the next, hopefully next 2 weeks or so. And his first insight is going to be specifically on the depth map and using it in the Fusion page for a variety of effects. So that should be interesting.
So I'm not a Fusion expert. I'm Fusion competent, I would say. But we know that Fusion has a full 3D subsystem, and some of the really advanced Fusion artists that were with me on the booth were actually using the depth map to extrapolate 3D geometry, and they were using it to relight scenes and to literally bounce particles off of objects in the scene just from the image. It is an incredibly useful tool. Just know it's pretty processor intensive. So what I've been doing is flipping it to faster, making my general adjustments, then flipping it to better for a higher quality result.
So now, Joe, actually, one more question that kind of harks back to the cloud thing we were just talking about and the remapping of file paths. Fusion, quite infamously, in my opinion, doesn't honor the system level remapping, drive remapping on the Fusion page in Resolve 17 and earlier. Has that been updated for 18?
If your sources come from a timeline object. I'm going to need to test that because I do not know the answer.
Yeah. It may still be that you might have to run the script to change your file paths in Fusion. But all right, anyway, sorry, that was just a random thought.
So my other absolute favorite new thing on the color page is another OpenFX called the Surface Tracker. And we're going to have some insights diving way deeper into this, but I want to give you the overall kind of top level view of it. I'm just going to grab it and throw it into my node tree. Now, you guys know that there's two ways to bring an OpenFX plugin into your node tree. You can drop it on a corrector node, or you can drop it right into the tree. If you're using the Surface Tracker for placing things with alpha channels, you need to drop it right into the tree because that's the only way you can get a foreground input number 2 alpha channel input. So what the Surface Tracker does is it tracks a mesh on a dynamically moving surface. So I'm just going to feed my image into the Surface Tracker, turn on highlight and go full screen. And well,
you lost your screen share.
We did not lose my screen share. Resolve crashed. I want to take this time to mention that Resolve 18 is in public beta. So
beta being the operative word.
Save your crash logs and send them to Blackmagic so we all can get a better product in the end. But also, all the normal caveats with beta software apply. You don't want to throw it onto your box in the middle of a project that is super deadline critical. Because yes, sometimes you do get crashes. But I'm back, right? You see the screen and everything?
Yep.
Cool. Let's go back to where we were. I'm going to grab that Surface Tracker again, drop it as a regular OFX, feed the image into it, go full screen. And the way it works is you draw first the boundaries of the mesh you want to track. So I'm going to track the front of the car. Longtime Mixing Light members will know that this is my favorite shot because it's a Volvo 240. Now, in the Surface Tracker interface, you've got bounds, mesh, track, and result. Those are kind of the different modes or pages of the effect. So once I've got the bounds set, I'm going to go to mesh, and it's going to automatically extrapolate a mesh that it thinks it can track very well. So it's looking at high contrast points and finding them. You can give it a limit, the maximum point spacing, or you can select a uniform grid, make as many as little points as you want. You can move them around. Alt-click will delete them. And I believe Shift Option, you can select a bunch of them and move them. So you can completely customize that mesh. All the shots I've tried it on so far, Automatic has given me the best results.
Did Blackmagic's engineers, when you were at the NAB, did they offer any preference as to where you want to start?
No, I think it depends completely on the needs of the shot.
Okay.
So I'm just going to track, and notice it's tracking all those points through the entirety of the shot, front and back. That's pretty well locked on. And the most obvious use case for this is putting something on top of another thing. So I've just got a MixingLight logo here. I'm going to feed it in, both picture and alpha. And under result, it's set to the default warp input 2 onto input 1. And if I zoom in and play back the shot, I'm just going to turn off the OpenFX overlay. It's put our MixingLight logo right on the car basically perfectly. And I've got a transform node here, so I can just go in and adjust the positioning of that. So it's great for logo paint work, tracking logos, stuff like that. But I don't think that is the best color grading use for it. I think it is a fantastic tool for beauty work and color grading work as well. So in this case, I'm actually going to put the surface tracker on a corrector node because I don't need an input alpha and I want to be able to copy and paste the node. Here I'm going to make bounds kind of around this guy's injury, track the mesh. Just let that track through. And what I'm doing here is kind of emulating something that I did on a previous insight with the match move OpenFX, wherein I'm going to take this moving image, completely remove all the motion from it, use that to do my paint or beauty work, and then reintroduce the motion, which you can do really good with the planar tracker that's in the match move, but that will always keep it on a flat surface. The mesh warp in the surface tracker gets you much better results on curved three-dimensional surfaces like people. So everything so far has been the same as what I did to place a logo, but under result, I'm going to select stabilize warp input 1. Now look, we've removed all the motion from that shot, and you can expand and contract its output just to give us a little bit more room to paint on. I'll grab a patch replacer. Again, I feel like this is the biggest, most powerful thing about these new semi-automatic tools is I can combine them with the normal image tools in Resolve in my node tree in any way that I want. So it's not locked into just the default use case. I can kind of build my own effect with it. So there, I've painted out the injury and I don't need to track it because it's not moving. So then what I need to do is just copy and paste that surface tracker onto a node afterwards. And I'm going to select rewarp stabilize clip. Now, at first, it doesn't look right. That's because the way the surface tracker works right now is it outputs the stabilized clip on top of the background. So it's actually doing the composite in this node. So to make this work, I need to add an OpenFX input, put the stabilized input on input 2, and the original background on input 1. Now, if I go full screen, you can see there's a little bit of an edge where it's introducing that stabilized patch because I expanded that edge out to give me more room to work with. I can expand and contract that edge on the restabilized side. So you can see I can adjust where the edge is. So I'm going to bring that out a little bit and add a little bit of softness. And now, if I full screen that and play it, look, we've painted out the wound basically perfectly without ever having to track it. And if I toggle that node on and off, it's pretty good.
Yeah, that is very impressive. In fact, I think I misspoke. I think what Igor is going to be doing for us is
The surface tracker.
the surface tracker, but using it in the Fusion page, very similar to what you'd been talking about.
The surface
Marco
tracker
asked,
is not actually available in the Fusion page yet.
oh, it's not. Oh, okay, then maybe I got it. Maybe that's not what he's talking about. Maybe he is talking about the.
But so far, this has all been kind of visual effects fixing stuff, which is like we do in the color suite a lot,
I'm
especially for
totally
beauty
impressed.
work.
I mean, you've got multiple inputs for foregrounds and backgrounds. You've got translations in order to be able to move stuff around within your selections. Marco asks, can you use the surface tracker with node sizing? What would be the case, do you think, for node sizing in combination with this?
Exactly the same thing, because we can use the exact same techniques that we would for paint work on something else. So if I go to node sizing, basically anything between these two nodes, we don't have to track. So
Yep.
I'm going to go to node sizing, turn on key lock. Oops. Except I put it on the timeline, which I don't want to do. Boom. Okay, so I'll go back to my node sizing. Why do I keep jumping the timeline? There we go. Turn on key lock. And now if I wanted to paint using node sizing, I could do the exact same thing. And again, no need to track it because the tracking is happening by the surface tracker stabilizing and then reintroducing the stabilized motion. So anything we do between these nodes is going to apply to the entire patch. So we can even use it for color grading, and I can add softness to the matte if I want to. So now I can do color changes in between those as well. And look, it tracks to the mesh of his arm perfectly, which is super powerful.
Yeah, the whole thing, it's kind of a little mind-bending, Joey, a little bit in my brain. So you're using, like, there in node number one, you've got that surface tracker applied, and then the selection's kind of flowing through the subsequent serial nodes until you get to another node that then puts it all back together again into the final image, is what it seems like to me, what's happening, yeah.
So on this shot, I did her face. And look, again, by default, there's just a little bit of an edge. You can see exactly where that patch is being placed back in. Yeah. And I'm just going to contract and give it a little bit of softness. So now anything between this node and that node that we do is going to be on her face without needing to track. So if we wanted to do some power windows, to do an advanced track, like I wanted to maybe darken this side of her face with a soft window, and it was giving me trouble tracking it. Go, let me just, oops. Why is my node not working?
Live demos.
Live demos. Oh, you know what? I think I did it. I did it outside of where her face is. This is an important thing. If you're going to draw a power window, you need to do it where you started the track from, because that's where her face or whatever you're tracking is.
Right.
One thing that you can do, I believe, somewhere in here, I thought there was a key to go to the track frame, but I don't remember where that shortcut is off the top of my head. So I'm just going to use highlight instead and do a soft window right there. Oops, I'm on the wrong node. So yeah, with it highlighted, I can see exactly where the positioning is. Make my window, give it a little bit of inside softness. And now if I turn off highlight and start adjusting that adjustment is going to track with her face the entire time. So if I turn off the window overlay, anywhere I go, that adjustment is tracking. So,
and Jamie says that if you go to the result tab and go to ref, which you would probably find the ability to go to the that keyframe.
I think you're right. Let's see. Go to reference.
Go to reference. Yep.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thanks,
I knew it was there, but that's now one last thing that you can do with the surface tracker that I think is pretty cool is if you do, again, bring it in as a OpenFX plugin on its own node, you can use it to track a power window. You can use it as kind of a supercharged power window tracker. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to make a track of a surface with the surface tracker, mesh, track the shot. So the easiest thing to do if you go to result is just say, create alpha mask. Now, if I highlight that, we've got a deforming matte from the Surface Tracker that we can, again, use our normal color tools like the Alpha Matte Shrink and Grow to shrink or grow if we wanted to, or we can do things like a Gaussian blur to give it some softness.
It's funny, this workflow, I'm starting to
And
feel
then
like,
feed that
you know,
into
we're
a matte. And
I
now
feel
I've
like
got a
we're in a
really nice,
VFX.
I've got a really nice matte tracked perfectly. But if we wanted to use this to track another power window, one that we've already drawn, we have that option as well. So I'm going to grab a power window here, just kind of make a crazy power window, give it some softness. If I feed that power window into the Surface Tracker with the matte input and go to the mode warp input 1's alpha, it's going to take that power window with the softness, with anything that we've done here in the more advanced power window editor, and it's going to track that power window. Now you see the edges right now are limited by those bounds that we did when we initially defined the Surface Tracker, right? But when you go to the result page, we still have that expand contract option. So we can expand out the region beyond the bounds. And now we're tracking a power window that we built in Resolve with the normal tools using the Surface Tracker. And then again, we can use the Alpha Matte Shrink and Grow after it, or Gaussian Blur after it, and use it in any node or any combination of nodes to do front and back or inside and outside if we wanted to. And does a really nice job tracking that power window. So yeah, those are kind of my three. I'm going to stop this share for a minute so you can see me. Those are kind of my three main new favorite color page tools. Now, there's a bunch of other new stuff if you look at the release notes, but I feel like those are going to be the ones I use the most on a day-to-day. The object mask, even if I'm not using it for color grading, I'm going to use it to re-enter things that move in front of my tracked windows or qualifiers or anything else that I do without having to do manual roto. The depth map, I mean, the possibilities for that are endless, and the results it does, the accuracy of it is so impressive that I think what I'm going to end up doing with it is just leaving it on a blank node in my node tree template and just leave it disabled. So it's always there to feed into any other node at the click of a button. And Surface Tracker, as you can see, we can use it to track power windows, do beauty work, do paint work, basically remove the motion from an image, do anything we want to that section of the image, and then replace the motion exactly back on it. I mean, that's I'm pretty impressed with that too. So all in all, my overall impressions of Resolve 18 are, it is fantastic. And besides that one crash that we just had earlier, you know, we've all had a lot of experience with Resolve betas over the years because they like to do public betas pretty often. I think this is the most stable public beta, at least for the first round, that I've ever seen. I think they probably, maybe because they had a little bit more time to refine it, but it has been very stable for me.
So Joey, you had a lot of stick time talking to a lot of different colorists, specifically about the tools you just showed us to, and you know, my big impression about them is they're very VFX oriented, right? You need to really use them. You need to understand alpha channels and depth maps and the routing of this information, and then the concept of applying a transform node in order
Yep.
to make some adjustment, things like that. What was the reaction of the colorists you talked to who saw that? Were they confused by it, or were
No, I
they
think
more
most
psyched
people
by it?
generally understood it. I think we're gonna, obviously, in like further insights, we're gonna go into much more deep
Yeah.
explanation of the routing and everything. You know, for a demo, you got to be a little bit quick and just show what it can do. But for the most part, if you're familiar with node-based grading, you'll be comfortable using these tools because, like I said earlier, my favorite part of this is not that they are set it and it's perfect, right?
Yeah.
It's that
Yeah.
they are flexible tools that integrate into the bigger node-based pipeline that I can manipulate outside of the tool or use for multiple different things in my node tree. I think that's what makes these more powerful than if they were just, oh, it's an automatic mask. It just masks it. Yay, right? The fact that I can feed that mat into any other node and do anything I want with it in the node tree is what makes it usable for me as a professional colorist.
So we have 7 minutes left. If anyone wants to ask a question or join the conversation, maybe you've got some feedback you wanted to share, maybe you've got a different feature that you think people should look at, feel free. If you want to join in with a microphone and or a camera, just raise your hand. I'll reach out to you. Joey, was there any questions you were getting from DaVinci Resolve users over those 4 days that seem to consistently come up time and time again that you had to address, or were people just
There
kind
were a
of
lot
like,
of there were a lot of logistical questions about how the new project library setup worked. So that's why I kind of wanted to get that one out of the way and just explain it. Because there was a lot of confusion about that. Some people thought that it was syncing media when it isn't. Some people didn't understand that it also worked with your own SQL database server if you had that. But in terms of the color tools, a lot of it was just, hey, show me the cool new stuff and what it can do for me. And again, I keep harping on the node-based aspect of it, but it's critical to me is that these tools can work in your existing color grading workflow.
yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, I'm actually somewhat blown away at how well the machine learning is recognizing objects and people in order to generate these rough masks that are actually tighter than you would expect.
Yeah.
Um, and then Tony is asking at Joey, when you're using the MagicMask DepthMask with a node in which you manually have assigned the camera color space in OETF versus leaving the gamma and color space as timeline. Well, that's interesting. I guess if you're doing node-based color space assignments,
I
uh,
have been doing it mostly in camera space and then feeding the resultant mat into a color managed node. So if I jump back to my screen share, notice here for this surface tracker, I did it in
yep,
camera space, but I
yep.
fed the mat into a node here after my IDT, so it's grading in ACES CCT. Same thing here with the depth map. I was using it. I'm gonna have to rebuild it real quick because I didn't save, but I was using the depth map on the original camera image and then feeding the mat into a color managed node to do my actual color change. One thing I haven't experimented much with is how a color space transform would affect the depth
Yeah,
map.
yeah.
So
That's
let's
the
just
next
try it.
question.
If I go from log C, and this is the cool thing about doing this node base though, because I can normalize the image to Rec 709 just for this node, just to go in the depth map. Honestly, I'm not sure it's massively different. It's just a little bit of a different range, but I can adjust the
Yep.
range using the customizability controls there. But so let's just look at this example. I have a color space transform normalizing this node into Rec 709 just to feed the depth map, but then I'm feeding that depth map into the alpha channel of a color managed node and making my color change in ACES CCT.
Yep.
So I have not found drastically different results going in camera space versus a normalized space. Your results may vary based on the content of your shots, but you always have the option of normalizing it into whatever display space you want, doing the MagicMask, doing the depth map, doing the surface tracker or anything, and then just feeding that mat into one of your color managed nodes.
Yeah, and it's important to recognize this still is public beta, and so it could be that maybe right now, whether you're managed or unmanaged, whether you've done that contrast expansion, it doesn't make a difference. But who knows? They may do some optimizations where, you know what,
I've
add some
always
contrast might help
been
you.
of the mind, and people, this argument goes back as far as color grading goes. It's kind of like asking a car guy, what oil should I buy? But doing a qualifier on an unnormalized image in most cases doesn't get you a drastically different result than the normalized image, because guess what? Normalizing the image does not give it any more information. In fact, depending on how you do the normalization, you might be throwing information away. What it does affect is the automatic color picker, for example. It might not do as good of a job on a non-normalized image, but if you dial in a qualifier on a original log image versus a Rec 709 image, you should be able to get just as good, if not better, results, because the fact is, when you normalize that image, you are not adding any more information or fidelity to the image. And everything in Resolve is 32-bit floating point anyway.
Yeah, so we've got a couple minutes left here, and I don't see any hands raised yet. So let me ask you, because you are also, you're a legit, straight up, editor, promo guy. On the edit page, was there anything that kind of excited you there? Did they do anything there where you were like, oh, this is going to make that side of my finishing career and editing career easier?
The database optimization,
Yeah.
I can't say enough happy things about it, especially with the cloud workflow. I think that'll be good for editors and colorists, because you can have editors handing things to colorists in various locations. One more thing I do want to mention that I didn't mention before, because it actually came up in beta 2. It's worth noting that we are on beta 2 already in under a week, which I think is great. But this is a really cool thing that they've added. If you are working in Dolby Vision, now on the deliver page, if you select MP4 and H.265 under advanced settings, you have to be on a 10-bit profile, so main 10. You now have a Dolby Vision profile. We can make Dolby Vision MP4s encoded in H.265 that will drop right onto your LG TV, your iPad, your iPad Pro, your iPhone, any other Dolby Vision capable device, and play back in Dolby Vision with the correct metadata. And that's brilliant. Absolutely, if you're working in Dolby Vision, that's fantastic, because it means you can send your client a screener that they can play on their iPad Pro, and it will be remarkably close, and you don't have to go through the very advanced Dolby Vision MP5 encoding regime that some of us have had to do in the past. Hey, Dario.
Hey,
Dario.
man, you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Cool. I just turned a mic on. I didn't do any testing beforehand. So because I'm going to be trying to push Premiere editors to like learn Resolve Edit, and I don't know it, I'm just as an idea, do you guys have any recommendations for resources that I could point people to make that transition besides what Resolve might be offering on their website? Because I think
I was going to say the training stuff on Blackmagic website is pretty good. They've got full books, PDF books you can download with practice media now.
Okay, good. Then I'll let them know to look for it there, because I definitely, something coming up, I want to push these guys to get off of Premiere, because everybody hates it anyway. So I was just looking for something like that.
I would say just open Resolve and start moving clips around and see how incredibly fast it is. And then
I like it and use it, but I just have to convince people who don't to use it. So I was just looking for the softest entry level or the smoothest way in as a recommendation, because I know how to use it, so I wouldn't even know what to look for to get out of Premiere. So that's interesting to know. That's all. I just wanted to ask that.
Yeah, I think also. Go ahead, Joey.
A good starting point is the courses they have on the website, which is really good.
Cool.
Yeah, and then also, and I highly also recommend the PDF book that you can get, because they have different levels. So there's the intro, and then there's the editing only, and then there's the color only. So they can get the quick overview and then dig into
I didn't even know that existed.
They want.
Why I'm asking. All right.
Yeah, and it's free. And then probably news is over the next 3 weeks, I'll be releasing a couple courses within MixingLight, and about a month after that, you'll be able to unlock one course free with, a membership at MixingLight, and members will be able to accrue credits to unlock training. So I'll be launching, I think, with the quick workflow, like the beginning to end intro to Resolve. I think there's going to be a cut page for people actually. I think the cut page is somewhat underrepresented, and so I put together a title on the cut page.
If I can make one suggestion, which I find that I've heard at least, people are intimidated just by project setup and understanding how to even before starting. So all of that, just
there's
to
a
make
title
sure
that's.
Gotcha.
I've got a title for DaVici Resolve optimization, And it's all about like for your specific CPU, how can you get Resolve working at the speed of your thought, even if it's an underpowered,
Well, I
computer.
guess now they can change the settings coming in, because if we're sharing a project, like the resolution
Yeah, they
settings,
can use
that's like,
proxies with that path mapping, and it works really well.
gotcha.
One quick thing, Stefano had a question in the chat. Is this Dolby Vision like Dolby created in Final Cut with metadata 8 point whatever the 8? He's talking about the HLG variant of Dolby Vision that comes available on recording on Apple devices. I am not sure if it can do that profile on output because I haven't tried yet, but the profiles that are available in a PQ project are PQ based. So you've got profile 8.1, which I believe is for Blu-ray, and you have Dolby Vision profile 5, which is what you're going to be using for almost any kind of screener that you're playing back on an iPad or an LG TV or something like that. So no, it is the PQ based Dolby Vision that we're all familiar with, not the HLG based iPhone Dolby Vision that is available in Final Cut 10.
Alrighty, and with that, we are going to wrap up. We've used up our time today. Fabian, you asked if we plan to upload Dolby Vision video tutorials in the near future. Two things on that. There's a lot already on there. If you have something in specific you want to ask us, email team.ml@MixingLight.com, and we'll see if we can get some specific answers for you in some training videos. Also, Dolby Vision, Dolby at the Dolby Institute has a 10-part series. It was Joey and Robbie Carmen, and I produced and edited it. And that's all on getting you up to speed. It's about 2 or 3 years old. There have been some changes since then, but the bulk of the content is completely applicable even today. So thanks for asking. This talk will be posted on MixingLight.com in the Insights library sometime next week. And so I want to thank everyone who is here. Dario for jumping on and asking a question with the camera. Thank you. Joey, thank you for your time. As always, you are spectacular. You're a fantastic demo artist, and you make all of us better. So thank you very much. And so for MixingLight.com, I'm Patrick Inhofer, and I will see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.